Hello, I'm Jim Ritz, the Executive Director of the Austin Theater Alliance, representing the Paramount and stateside theaters here in Austin, Texas. The film you're about to watch provides a glimpse into one of the last of the few remaining majestic-style theaters left in the United States. Built in 1915, the Paramount Theater has been serving the entertainment needs of Central Texas for nearly a century. Located in the heart of downtown Austin, virtually in the shadow of the state capitol, the Paramount Theater is acoustically more intimate, visually more stunning, and historically more significant than any theater in Austin and most of the theaters in the United States. Today, the Paramount and its companion venue, the stateside at Paramount Theater, has a mission to provide the widest entertainment options for the most diverse audience in all of Central Texas. Together, these theaters provide an annual array of over 200 live performances featuring dance, music, comedy, drama, and a rich history of film exhibition. Additionally, these theaters are the centerpiece of 3 festivals in town, including South by Southwest Film, the Austin Film Festival, and of course the Moon Tower Comedy and Oddity Festival. In addition to our in-school programs and summer camps, the Austin Theater Alliance makes it possible for over 20,000 young people to attend live performances at both theaters. For most of these kids, it is the first time in their life they've had a chance to see live theatrical performance, and we believe it transforms them forever. I trust that you will enjoy this stroll through the fascinating history of what has become known as the crown jewel of Congress Avenue. Through the continued support of the citizens of Austin and the communities around, the Paramount and stateside theaters will continue to provide nourishment to the souls of generations to come for audiences of Central Texas. Thank you again for watching today.
Once in a great while, we are inspired. We are captivated. We are amazed. When celebrity is surpassed and a legend is born. This is Texas Legends. Throughout its 90 years, from vaudeville to drama, from film premieres to live music, the Paramount Theater has served as the main stage for Austin entertainment. Through its presentation of so many legendary performances, the theater has attained a legendary status of its own. The Paramount Theater, a Texas legend.
I guess when I was 5 years old and I saw Bambi here, that's my earliest recollection.
All through high school, I'd bring dates. We'd sit up here in the balcony, by the way. So I had a lot of good times here at the Paramount Theater.
My first experience was just driving through Congress and wondering what was in there.
Walking in today and seeing the stage from the point of view of the audience, it still gives me that same feeling of, you know, have I really played here?
In a sense, the Paramount represents the big time, the big leagues, the big show. And if you're a filmmaker or even if you're a musician, I think that the Paramount is sort of like that Carnegie Hall of Austin.
You always feel like when you're inside, you want to look up and see the beautiful ceiling, and it's a great place to play, and it's a great place to be an audience member.
It has been this imposing, appropriately, beautiful presence here, throughout several cycles of when downtown was hip and active and it wasn't quite as active.
It's one of those things that people don't realize what they've got until they lose it.
You know, how could this have ever been threatened, or how could this have ever been in a state of disrepair? But it was.
I can't imagine Austin, Texas without the Paramount Theater. I mean, it's the only really beautiful historical theater that we have here.
Everybody wants to have their films premiered here at the Paramount.
If the Paramount wasn't here, where would I screen my movies? I think I would have to build a theater. And it would be called, the new Paramount, and it would emulate the old Paramount, because it would be a real tragedy. I couldn't imagine going to any of the other very nice theaters, like the Metropolitan and things are nice theaters, but I would never want to put my final movie there. Suddenly I think I would just bypass theaters altogether at that point. Let's just send it right to DVD. What happened to the theater experience? You lose that communal experience and that sense of history.
If there's one thing that the Paramount Theater has just about more than anything else on the whole block is history.
Well, the Paramount Theater opened October the 11th, 1915. It was built by Ernest Nall, N-A-L-L-E. He and his family are a prominent Austin family. Been around for a long time. And it was originally opened, as you know, as the Majestic Theater, and stayed the Majestic until, I think, 1930.
What's great about the Paramount is, in truth, it's still operating out of its original footprint, almost exactly the way it was operating when it was built in 1915 as a vaudeville house. Today we would call it a variety house, but we still operate with ropes and sandbags backstage. And that's called a hemp house, and a lot of people in Austin think I'm talking about something else, but that's just what ropes used to be made of.
I guess with a lot of modern day houses that are built now, everything's probably more, automated, I would suppose, than actually doing it the old-fashioned manual way.
For this theater to be so similar, down to the brick of what it was like in 1915, I think is extraordinary. Many theaters like this in other cities have been torn down. The gentleman who designed this theater, John Everson, was one of the most prolific theater designers in North America, and at one point, I believe it's estimated there were about 2,500 of his theaters built. There are now 24 of them still standing. Of those 24, there are very few that still operate with ropes and sandbags like we do. As a matter of fact, I think there are only 11 theaters in North America that still operate like ropes and sandbags. So the Paramount, from a historic preservation perspective, is significant on a global level.
One of the other aspects of why I've always loved this particular place, the War Department of the Republic of Texas was on this site. So there's a whole, not just the Paramount, so there's a whole progression of history that belongs to Austin and Travis County and the whole state of Texas right here.
The Paramount was built in 1915 as a vaudeville house, and not a lot of people today know that term of vaudeville, but it was a series of live acts, short acts, one after the other, that usually would comprise about 90 minutes, 2 hours worth of programming, and that was the dominant form of entertainment in that part of the 20th century.
Now, in those days, the major stars that toured with vaudeville, what have you, they traveled on the train circuit to all these cities, big and small. The Marx Brothers played here, Helen Hayes played here, Sarah Bernhardt played here, Sally Rand, the infamous stripper who was not really a stripper, who wore a flesh-colored body stocking, Cab Calloway. I mean, all the greats played here in those days. And even in 1930, when they started doing more film, because it was getting to be a really hot deal, they still for probably another 25 years would have live entertainment coming through here.
People like Mae West, Harry Houdini, all the Barrymores, Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontanne, who were the first couple of the American stage in the 20s and 30s. A lot of the just incredible names of show business history played in that venue in the first half of the 20th century.
Houdini came to Austin in 1916, and the Paramount Theater opened on October the 12th, 1915. So he was one of the first performers that performed in this theater.
Houdini playing the Paramount in 1916 means that people from all over the world want to come to the Paramount and see a place where Houdini played.
Of course, he was part of a vaudeville troupe, so the dancers and singers and acrobats were also part of the show. So he was just one part of the show.
He was only scheduled to be here, I believe, one night, and Austin loved Houdini, and Houdini loved Austin so much that he postponed his tour to Arkansas and Oklahoma and stayed in Austin for almost a week.
When Houdini arrived in Austin on Monday, he told both the Austin Statesman and the Austin Tribune, the two newspapers, that the Paramount Theater, which was a Majestic at the time, was a high-class theater that any larger city would be happy to have in their town.
There's something about this theater that catches people and captures them.
In the 1930s, all the great films were starting to occur. Busby Berkeley, fantastical musicals, the Warner Brother MGM years, of Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn, and a host of people. The films were becoming a big deal, a really big deal. a lot easier to do. The public loved it. It was cheaper. And, I think that a lot of the concert touring stars of those days, vaudeville started to wind down. Radio was coming up, and vaudeville kind of started to disappear, about the same time that film was really, coming on strong.
The theater sort of has a history of surviving. When vaudeville died, it became a movie house, and for many years it was the premier movie house in town.
This was always the place where first-run movies came, and particular roadshow movie performances of things like Rodgers and Hammerstein. The big musicals always played here with intermissions, Greatest Show on Earth, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
In 1930, vaudeville had died. It was purchased by Paramount Studios, officially became the Paramount.
Back during that period, studios owned their own houses, okay? So this was the Paramount Theatre owned by Paramount Pictures. We only showed Paramount-produced movies here. No MGM, no Republic. Those had other houses downtown.
There was the Paramount Theater, the State next door, the Queen across the street, the Capitol Theater on 6th Street, and the Ritz Theater. And there were a couple of movie houses, one on Guadalupe and one on South Congress. But downtown, the Paramount, well, actually all over Austin, this was the premier theater when I was growing up.
In those days, it was real segregated back in the 40s, and blacks were not allowed to come into the Paramount Theater. So they used to just sit across the street and dream that maybe one of these days they'd get a chance to come in. If they lived long enough, they'd get a chance to come in. So the Paramount was the place to go in those days. So what they did, they said, well, we'll name ourselves after the Paramount. Maybe one of these days they'll let us in there, So that's how the Paramount thing came about. Just goes to show you look how far we have come, as a people to now, instead of being a janitor in the Paramount, now we can go in and sit down and enjoy a good gospel concert. And the gospel concert is centered around the Paramount Singers, who were, the Paramount Singers was named after the Paramount Theater. So I'm pretty sure the Reverend Franklin, A.C. Franklin, all over, they're up in heaven smiling like mad. Say, hey, look, we finally made it. We're not there, but our kids and our grandkids can enjoy it.
When the suburban film theaters and the whole suburban thing started to happen in the 50s, and the film theaters started moving out to the suburbs, it basically killed, these large buildings because, you didn't have multiple screens, there are huge places to air condition and to maintain, and people were moving away from downtown, businesses, banks, everybody, and a lot of people in Austin felt downtown was unsafe.
Palmer Auditorium opened in 1960. It was a big new auditorium, and so the big shows tended to go then to Palmer, and the Paramount's fate then was just pretty much sealed as a movie theater. Live shows were very few and far between after 1960. At that point, particularly in the latter part of the 60s, was the time in the country, all over the country, where the downtown movie palace started going into decline.
The Paramount started getting a little bit on the run-down side.
Basically, the companies that own these theaters stopped any kind of repairs because they were losing money. But they had long-term leases, so they had to keep doing something.
And it became a B movie house. At that point, its future was real shaky.
These theaters traditionally, nationwide, they fall into disrepair, they become dollar cinema, or what was the order? Dollar cinema, then porn theater, then demolition. There's a history to so many of these theaters.
Usually when a movie theater gets to that place, it never sort of returns.
Post-war suburban sprawl in the second half of the 20th century led to the decline of the downtown in many American cities, including Austin. And for the Paramount Theater, survival was in jeopardy.
At one point, I know that it was being considered to be torn down, and I think a Holiday Inn was scheduled to be put here. So it did get get sort of close to being closed. It's never had its doors closed, it's never been shuttered, but its future was sort of shaky.
As is often at times the case, it was citizens who stepped up and said, you know, wait a minute, we can't lose this piece of our urban fabric.
The hippies just went crazy. God bless them.
This would be another Wendy's, probably.
So some people decided to save the Paramount. The one person that most people still know and associate is John Bernadoni.
Well, I came up with the original concept in 1971. I was in Los Angeles helping a friend, and we went to see Clockwork Orange at the old Pantages, which is a spectacular historic theater. And I started thinking, I think that Austin has one of these. And I'd never been in it, you know. And so this was 1971. I just graduated from college. I was 23. And came back straight from the airport, came here, saw that the 5 Flying Fingers of Death were playing with Bruce Lee on film here, bought my ticket, came inside, looked around a little bit, blown away, snuck backstage. Yes, there's a backstage rigging, which you need for plays and what have you. And immediately went up to talk to the general manager, Charlie Root, who was an usher here when he was 19. And I told him my vision. I said, I want to see this theater reborn. I want to see it go back to legit theater and concerts. And he was totally euphoric about it because he hated to see the Paramount fall into the kind of decay that happened to all the great theaters in the downtowns of the entire country. From the 1960s to the time that we took over in 1975, they continued to be open every day. They were showing film, they were showing exploitative film.
A king of crime is born.
They showed a lot of kung fu in the latter years. A typical model that was happening all over the United States for these great downtown historic theaters.
Some entrepreneurs came along, John Bernadoni, Chuck Eckerman, and Steve Scott, and they said, well, you know, we need to take this over as a profit-making venue and bring some really new cool acts in here.
Believe it or not, the attitude when we first started was one of great apathy. Which surprised me, even from the arts community. And a lot of people had not been in this building forever, maybe 2 generations. So it took an awful lot of work, and the media gave us reams of coverage.
I remember we were watching the TV one night, and there was a commercial. Of course, I didn't know who he was then, but there was John Bernadoni on stage at the Paramount Theater asking to help save the Paramount.
I'd talk to anybody who would talk to me. I talked to the Girl Scout troop, just whatever it took to get the word out. And then we did a couple of test shows with Dave Brubeck and with Herbie Mann in early 1974, where the theater was still showing film, and we just rented the theater for the night to see what people thought.
John and 2 of his college buddies said, let's throw a concert and see if people want to come. And they came in and they said it was an old rundown movie house with popcorn on the floor and sticky Coke, and they themselves cleaned it up, and they said their dinners for weeks were hot dogs from the concession stand.
We did 2 shows, and we had about 800, 900 people out of 1,300 possible for each show that night. And the air in this building was electric. You could cut it with a knife. It was like something out of a Fellini film. It was almost surreal. You can imagine walking in here, having never even known it was here, and seeing something that was, even though it was funky at the time, the building, because it was, we didn't have any money. It was dirty and, rotten carpet and springy seats, but people were very cool about it because the general beauty of the place was intact. And that lit the fire, that lit the rocket that really started to propel us forward.
I think they said that Kung Fu movies were running the night before. They turned over Dave Brubeck. Very next night, Kung Fu movies were back on. So they were just testing it out. And but they said 2 weeks later they were bankrupt. So that's where the whole concept of a nonprofit came into being.
It was very difficult for them to keep it afloat as a for-profit business. So they decided to go in conjunction with the Austin Heritage Society and go and get the to establish it as a nonprofit. And so the board of the Paramount Theater was formed as a 501c3 nonprofit organization.
Nonprofit status brought a new respect to the Paramount's legacy and contributed to a downtown renaissance.
In order for us to qualify for a major federal grant that was predominantly responsible for 75–80% of the cost to restore this building, we had to prove ownership.
The theater probably wouldn't be in existence today if it weren't for the generosity of one of the former owners, Roberta Crenshaw. She owned half of the property, and other members of her family owned the other half, and she donated her half in the late 1970s.
And then we got a 99-year lease from the other heirs, and those two things together constituted ownership, which qualified us for the federal grant, which we were able to get, which it came in chunks. The first one being $600,000 in about 1976, which was like $600 million at the time.
It was kind of like from that, everything sort of took off. And the people of Austin were really excited. The Heritage Society then went to lots of community leaders. They went to people in the legislature, they went to lobbyists, they went to the Junior League, and they got this real community spirit to come together to restore the theater.
It was declared a city landmark, a state landmark, and now we're a national landmark.
The theater is totally owned now by the Paramount Theater, or the Austin Theater Alliance, as it's now called.
From the time I started till the time the first day we opened under our own banner was 4 years. We took over the lease April 15th, tax day of 1975. The first film we showed was Top Hat with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, which was an old 1930s, one of their great classic films. And there was like 1,000 people that came to the first showing. I mean, we couldn't believe it. I remember walking down the road, down Congress Avenue, and I remember a chill went up my spine. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this could happen. Well, when we got the first $600,000, we were actually, able to start phasing the project and, doing some restoration on the building. I believe we started with the facade and the backstage area, which was in pretty bad shape. We needed to re-rope the entire rigging system. We needed lighting, we needed sound. The downstairs dressing area was something out of a Vincent Price movie.
Because this is a historic building, there's certain restrictions on what you can do. And we had to really walk the tightrope of making sure, although the building was built in 1915 and the interior was very, very plain, we had to make it clear that this was more on the line of adaptive reuse into the style of like the 1920s.
When I came here in 1980, okay, at pretty much the tail end of the restoration of the Paramount, okay, there was scaffolding everywhere. It was a big mess.
One of the biggest challenges we faced was the fact that we did have to operate at the same time we were restoring. Anybody who has ever lived in a house and decided to redo their kitchen and still live there know it's kind of a nightmare. But we had no choice because we couldn't stop because there was no money for salaries and rent and utilities and so forth. There was money for what's called bricks and mortar, but there wasn't money for the operational staff, ever. Finally, we got to a point in the restoration in 1979 where we did have to close because we had to pull out all the seats, put up the scaffolding to, repaint parts that were damaged, re-gild the proscenium arch. We had to clean the floors, big time, and restain the concrete floors. And then we had to when we put in new seating.
These are not the original opera boxes, okay? The original opera boxes were torn out in 1929 when they turned it into more of a movie theater, okay? These boxes were put back in 1980. Right after the Paramount was finished with its restoration, the Walter Tipps building across the street started to undergo its restoration. Then they just started going down the whole block with all these different buildings, taking off the 40s and 50 eras false fronts that they had put on some of these buildings to expose the original architecture.
There was always something that somebody wanted to see at the Paramount. So it had an enormous impact on downtown viability.
Restoration of the Paramount ushered in an exciting new era in its history. The Paramount would become what it is by returning to what it was originally intended to be, only for a new generation of theatergoers and entertainers.
In the fall of 1980, I think it was 1980, we reopened we were lucky because at that time, the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, the Broadway show, was on tour. And they booked the theater for a month for 32 performances and sold out every seat for every show. No computerized ticketing, by the way, hard tickets, manual tickets. We, along with Liz Carpenter's help, convinced Lou Wasserman, who was the chairman of Universal MCA, to let us do a world premiere of the motion picture of Best Little Whorehouse in Texas with Burt Reynolds, Dolly Parton, Charles Durning, Jim Nabors, Jerry Reed, what have you.
You know, being 19 and working around the corner, you know, they blocked off the street, and Burt Reynolds and Dolly Parton and the whole crew was here for that. And that was just a fun event to see a world premiere.
And this was not what some people call a world premiere. This was like 1930s world premiere.
Back in the 80s, we did a lot of presenting, but we also did some producing.
We did Death Trap with Leslie Nielsen and did a short little tour. We did Massapia with E.G. Marshall. And we did a national tour of Dracula with Martin Landau. So these are some pretty serious actors, believe me, at the time, and it was quite a big deal for us.
We produced 3 or 4 very well done shows. The problem was that they cost more than they brought in money, so they put the theater back in some financial straits.
Literally, the place was almost bankrupt, and again, the community turned out and turned it around and gave money.
It was a bad recession time, economic recession time in Austin, and the theater had suffered from some mistakes from earlier years that had finally caught up with it, and just economic times were bad in general, and we were really kind of on the verge of having to close the theater potentially, but I didn't know any better in terms of whether or not we could keep it open or not, but I said sure, I'd take the job. And with the help of some really dedicated board members, we kind of orchestrated a kind of do or die fundraising campaign and just really kind of put our pedal to the metal, and over the course of a few years turned the theater around.
We took buckets and walked the streets to collect money to pay for the electricity.
We did everything from pass the plate in the theater, just like you would in church, to standing out on the street corners and begging for money.
I definitely believe
from
there's
passersby.
life
We were all
in
over
these
the
walls.
media. We did 1,000,001 different fundraising stunts. We slashed expenses to the bone. It meant a lot of painful cuts in terms of having to let staff go and things like that. And we actually did close the theater for the summer of '88, and just myself and 2 other people were there kind of plotting our comeback.
Theater is always in danger, and it always will be. It's a tricky business.
And it takes a person of vision to run a place like this or to restore it. And Paul Butel brought us here, and as a result, we helped save the Paramount. And now Paul's gone on.
I'll give John Bernadotte credit, though. He cut us a great deal when we first came to town. He was very generous with us.
Yeah.
And once the show was a hit, he was a big supporter.
Yeah, he was.
He was a big supporter.
But Paul Butel had the
Paul
vision.
saw
Yeah.
Paul saw that this thing was going to make some money.
When we first came back from New York, people had talked about various theaters in town that over the University of Texas, and when they mentioned the Paramount, we had not performed here, but we were so caught up in our own success, being in New York, the toasts of New York for such a long time, and enjoying all of that, we didn't know that the Paramount was in trouble financially. So, I still wasn't, even when the show opened here. But we found out later that Greater Tuna saved the Paramount, that the money that came in from that first production and from all the productions ever since, it was something like over $5 million over a certain period of time. And they even honored us one night after the show for that. And at that point, I realized that, we had had a great deal of influence on saving the Paramount. And when we weren't really paying that much attention, we were just having fun doing our show here. We always do our show here.
Wait in the station wagon with Connie. Vera, that boy's not right.
Little did we know that we would play thousands of performances in this theater and that it would become our theater home. And we just have, there's an enormous affection.
Glass houses.
The Greater Tuna guys are just fabulous, and then Greater Tuna Christmas, and they are just, didn't they go to the Kennedy Center in Washington? But they started here. This is their home, and they are always so fun to see.
If we write anything, it's for this theater and that audience.
Well, it's great to live in a town that's legalized freedom. It's such a theory.
They got it. They didn't see the Paramount Theater as, this very elitist kind of environment, just because it's an older theater. They saw it as they saw it as home. They saw it as a tradition.
There's a familiarity and a family feel. In fact, I remember one time coming back to Austin. We'd been away for a while. We came back, and it was opening night, and the lights came up, and they gave us a standing ovation. First thing, that we had to get the standing ovation out of the way before we could start the show, which was just as honorable an experience as anyone could ever ask for. And it was their way of saying, you are ours.
My first few weeks on the job, I was a bit overwhelmed with the responsibilities that had been given me. I'm in charge of a national landmark, and I'm thinking, whoa. So I was here late, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and a few nights, getting used to the place. And so I was here by myself. And I just knew that I wasn't alone. I was alone, but there was something, the theater was alive. And I caught myself actually speaking out loud to, hey, I'm here, and I love the theater. Don't worry about me, I'm not trying to ruin anything. And I'm like, why am I? So I definitely believe there's life in these walls. Whether it's haunted or not, I haven't seen anything, but our head custodian, Tony Johnson, can tell you some stories.
Yes, I have run into the ghost around here. And there's a bathroom up there behind that projection booth that's haunted, okay? I don't like that bathroom. I don't go in there because I hear voices when I'm in there. I don't care for it. I can't understand what they're saying. It's like a but I can distinctively tell that one's a male voice and one is a female voice. I don't know what they're saying. It's like, well, there he is again, let's get him. But I just don't like that room. I ain't going in there anymore.
We're right next to a dressing room that I only learned the last time I was here. It's haunted. Now, this was someone new who's working here, so I don't know if they're just blowing smoke when they tell her that, but I didn't want to go in there. And she said she understood why.
Now this sounds so theater, to say, well, but I haven't had anything that indicated a ghost at the Paramount to me. Now I know people have talked about it, but yeah. I wouldn't spend the night here,
A friend of mine's daughter came to see a show once and sat up there where the projectionist supposedly sat. He used to sit up there and smoke cigars. And she didn't know anything about it, and she kept smelling a cigar.
Many of the staff smells a cigar, and supposedly there's a gentleman that sits in our opera box smoking a cigar.
He's dressed in, I would say, early 20th century type clothing, okay, from like when the building was built in 1915. And he sits up here and he smokes a cigar. And I've never seen him, but I have smelt cigar smoke. And there's no smoking allowed in the Paramount Theater.
That's tied to what, for me, was, without question, my saddest time while I was at the Paramount. It involves our much beloved projectionist of many, many years, a man named Walter Norris.
He was the projectionist here for years. He was also our union president, Walter Norris, and he taught me a lot. And I get nostalgic on the rail and in the booth with him. He died here, I believe it was 2000. He died in the booth. And it seems like he always knew that he was going to too.
It was the opening night of our summer film festival, and we were showing Casablanca like we generally do. And Walter passed away on the job in the projection booth, had a heart attack and died. And I found him up there. I was watching the movie, sitting in the balcony, having the popcorn and watching the movie, and said I thought I'd go up and say hi to Walter and maybe ask him to turn the sound up just a little bit. And I went up there and found him laying on the floor, and he was gone.
Walter was always joking with me. Jokingly, he said, when I die, I'm going to die here on the rail and you're going to have to clean it up. And I told him, no, I'm just kick you off and call props. And he laughed and says, well, then I'll just die in the booth. And 3 days later, he did. And he got the last laugh there.
Walter was a very wonderful guy. Just the kind, always say hello to you, always talk to you, and if you had any questions about the films, he always had the answers.
It was a very, very sad time for us, but then as we were hanging around the lobby, later the staff that was there that night and others came in, everybody just kind of like flocked in when they got the word about Walter. We decided that was the way he wanted to go.
When Walter died, the stagehands here at the Paramount still put out a donut for Walter. And it's always there because they feel like if it's not there, something will happen because he wants it. So there's always a donut for Walter. Isn't that great?
Some of the first few times that I was with Lance here and we were chasing a problem down, one of our lamps, this lamp here, was flickering badly. We did everything we could to it, changed out all the components. The manufacturer said, y'all have done everything you could do. And so we quit at the end of the day, and Lance says, I forgot to bring the donuts. Walter is mad at us. And so the next day, when he came back, he brought a dozen chocolate donuts and some Snicker bars, and the light worked fine.
I loved Walter. I would come in and I'd say, Walter, do I need to stay and watch this movie? Oh yes, it's a great one. And the night before he passed along, I sat on a little bench inside before, and we visited for a long time, and he always had a big smile on his face.
He was part of the ambience of the whole thing, and I loved Walter.
Many credit the Paramount for fostering Austin's love of film. The Paramount creates an event with every movie it shows, whether it's the latest work by Austin filmmakers, or one of the world premieres presented in the fall at the Austin Film Festival, or in the spring at South by Southwest.
South by Southwest is wonderful. It's a film festival in which everybody comes to Austin to hawk their films, so to speak. And they're shown here. Many times they're a very large premiere, world premiere. Sometimes they're just a premiere here at Austin.
Every year when we're deciding what we're going to show at the film festival at South by Southwest, you know, without a doubt, the big glitzy gala premieres happen at the Paramount just because it's a venue that deserves it. It's a venue that can accommodate it because, you know, it can seat a lot of people.
That's my time of the year, the South by Southwest. I mean, I come here in the morning and stay until midnight.
With screenings at South by Southwest, the Paramount almost becomes a rock concert in a lot of ways because the audience reaction is so great and the theater helps.
The audiences are just like, literally, Robert calls it hanging off the rafters, you know, because that's basically what they're doing.
I find the Austin audience is very hip, but it's a very hip town.
For Sin City, Robert had them install special microphones throughout it so that he could capture the audience's reactions. And he put that in the DVD.
I'll cash your check in the morning.
We did this screening of the film Super Size Me right before it came out and everything, and the filmmaker Morgan Spurlock was here, and he still cites that screening at the Paramount as being like, you know, a rock concert.
It really is a place that has eventness written all over it.
During South by Southwest, the lines here at the Paramount go from our front door either way all around the block, and sometimes meet in the middle at the back of the block.
The filmmakers and the actors and the actresses from out of town who come to Austin for South by Southwest fall in love with this theater. You know, they think it's just so beautiful, so magical, such a piece of history, and you know, it really helps make South by Southwest what it is. Local filmmakers who have come to the Paramount Theater for years as fans, and you know, seen classics and more classics up on the big screen, and seen all kinds of, you know, crazy events here. And for us to be able to give them the opportunity to show their work up on the Paramount screen, to fulfill a movie theater fantasy, so to speak, is so great. And you know, we always try to do that for the local filmmakers because we think it's a real treat to have that experience.
It's always so special to come to a premiere or an event here. You know, it's right down, you can look up the street and see the Capitol, and you get that sense of place and history, and it feels like a real theater. There's nothing to compare it to.
In a lot of ways, the Paramount can be the great, you know, validator for a lot of films, because, you know, people know that if a film can go off at the Paramount and can be a success during South by Southwest, then odds are it'll have a good life when it goes nationwide.
You realize what a great big city this is, that you can create modern cinema right here in the town and show it in a great theater and be next to all these iconic, you know, buildings.
It's an event when it's at the Paramount. You have that great facade, you know, that really says movie theater. It's not just a box on a freeway.
I think the most probably exciting premiere I remember having here is for the Newton Boys. I mean, we had the full like red carpet, and we pulled up in the 1920s, you know, cars, and we had lots of celebrities, and it just felt like a real event.
At South by Southwest one year, we showed a screening of Richard Linklater's Waking Life, and there's a very pivotal scene in that film where the camera, it's all animated, and the camera sort of swoops down into the Paramount through the front doors, and you know, hits the screen of the Paramount where there's something going on, and you're watching this all in the film. Well, we played the film here at the Paramount, and no one had really seen it at that point. This was very early on, way before it had come out in theaters. And I remember seeing that scene myself sitting in this theater and thinking, wow, that's really cool, and walking out, and people still to this day talk about that experience.
When that scene in that location came up, you could just feel a wave go through the audience, kind of from the top of the theater all the way down to the screen. It was just like, whoa.
For Spy Kids 3, we did the world premiere here. And it was a very successful movie, but we actually shut down 2 blocks of Congress that time, and it made it really fun, and we had barbecue from County Line, and you know, it was just a fun thing that I don't think any child will ever forget.
We have a different atmosphere from a modern theater. Just, you know, the architecture, the acoustics, and the sight lines, the fact that we have a balcony instead of one floor with a sloped floor.
The fact that they show Gone with the Wind here, you know, once every 2 or 3 years is so much fun. You come down here and get your popcorn, and it's still a lot of fun to see Giant, Gone with the Wind, Clockwork Orange, whatever the big movie is, still great to see it here.
See Casablanca on this street?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
my goodness.
The movie series has always been a lot of fun.
The movie series is great. And Lawrence of Arabia, come on, men, come on!
I kind of think of the summer film series at the Paramount like Barton Springs Pool. You know, maybe a few hundred people are coming each night to see a movie, but if I were to ever suggest that we were going to stop doing film at the Paramount, all of Austin would beat down the door and probably ask for my resignation.
Do you think that many people will turn out to your local, you know, 24-screen multiplex to see Casablanca? The answer is no. You know, they go to the Paramount and see it because it's part of the total overall experience. You're sitting there in this great old theater, which has got this wonderful ambiance, and it's where Casablanca premiered, and you know, we are literally recreating that experience for the audience.
We've had all kinds of celebrities come through here.
Everybody you could possibly think of, especially in the old days of the 30s and 40s, has been on that stage, or even before that in the vaudeville years, has been on that stage.
Well, Debbie Reynolds was one of my favorites that came through here. She was really awesome. She was so sweet. And also Matthew McConaughey, Sandra Bullock, Dennis Hopper.
Right in that box over there, we did the cover photo for my record called "And His Large Band." And if you look at it, it's in black and white, but if you look at it, you'll recognize it right away. But, I mean, the Paramount has been home to me here in Austin.
Katharine Hepburn played here in the live version of Philadelphia Story. She said that she would do the play for free if she could have the rights. She sold the rights to one of the movie studios with the stipulation that she would be the starring role, and they had to film the movie in 8 weeks because she'd agreed to tour the live play. So she came through the Paramount in the 40s with the live version of Philadelphia Story, and then her film probably screened here the very next year.
I remember when Russell Crowe was here for his film Texas, his documentary about his band, and Kevin Connor, who's a friend of his, was like, "Oh, I need to have a beer with Russell," and so I literally have to run up to the lobby and like talk to the concession stand and try to get like a 6-pack of Shiner Bock, but they didn't realize I was getting it for Russell Crowe, and then it was this long process. So literally I'm running up the aisle carrying a 6-pack of Shiner Bock to try to deliver it in time, and luckily it was pulled off. But it was probably the only time that year that we actually had somebody up on stage drinking a beer at the Paramount Theater, which typically you don't see that often, but it was Russell Crowe and it was South by Southwest, so it worked.
The first time I played the Paramount in Austin, it was years ago, like in the 70s, and you know, in those days it's like your fans are the same age you are, and a lot of college kids and stuff like that. And I drank a 6-pack on the stage, you know, just to say that I could.
The famous Houdini Hole is, I'm sure everybody talks about that, but that's one of the first things I learned about when I came to the Paramount.
Of course, the mural is, that's Saint Cecilia, who is the patron saint of musicians and thieves, I think, you know. Kind of an odd combination, but maybe not when you really think about it.
The first story I heard was that it was used to suspend a cable for some kind of trick, but maybe it's all made up.
A lot of people call the hole in the center of the Paramount Theater ceiling as the Houdini Hole. I told Ken, I said, when you do the tours, you can call it the Houdini Hole. But Houdini probably didn't put it up there. Right.
There is an old pulley with ropes that's mounted way in the back there.
Where we're at now is we are behind the proscenium arch above the stage. Ken believes it was used by Houdini to perform a very famous trick. Some folks have said Harry Blackstone. It could be Harry Potter for all I know.
Houdini did 2 tricks when he performed here in 1916. One was the Chinese water torture cell, and the other the East Indian needle trick. For both of those tricks, he would not need anything to hang from the ceiling. So I rather doubt that hole in the ceiling was placed by Houdini. However, it might have been placed by a friend of his, Harry Blackstone Sr., who was a well-known magician in the 20s and 30s, 40s, 50s, up until 1960. Actually could have placed the hole up there because he appeared in this theater many times.
Apparently there was a cage that was hanging from a rope right there, and the lights went out in all the buildings, and I guess he said, you know, presto or whatever. And when the lights came back on, what I was told was that there was a live tiger in this cage.
He did a lot more magic than Houdini did. Houdini was the escapologist, where Blackstone was really a true magician.
My favorite thing in the whole theater is the fire curtain, hand painted in 1915 in St. Louis. It's been sealed now, but it's an asbestos curtain. So if there was a fire back then, it was going to happen on stage, okay? You know, with the lights and stuff like that. So the fire curtain would have came down, those metal doors would have slammed shut. That way it would have contained any type of fire that was going on to prevent it from spreading to the house.
The night after Interstate
theaters had shown their last film, we took over and the public was gone, and we came in and we started to clean the theater to the best of our ability. There was only like 5 of us or something at the time. I was backstage, and I saw the bottom of what we call a drop. I saw the rigging for this thing, for the drop, and I went and started to bring it in. It was on a counterweight. And we had the footlights were on at that time so we could see in the building. And as I was bringing in this drop, my cohorts out here started going, "Wow, unbelievable. You cannot believe what you've got to get it. Burn it out. You drop what you're doing. Come out here right this second." They were going crazy. Well, by this time I brought it all the way in. On my side, all I could see is black. So I came out, running down the stairs and saw this unbelievably beautiful, colorful, never had seen the day of sunlight. 1915 fire curtain with this pastoral scene in every color of the rainbow. Stunning. And we just sat there and nobody said a word. And for it to happen the very night that we took over officially, it was almost like a portent, a message that we were on the right track.
The Paramount, from a historic preservation perspective, is significant on a global level as far as, even though it's only 90 years old, the fact that it hasn't been changed so that we're a turn-of-the-century house is really great.
Well, I think the Paramount is one of those things that makes Austin unique. There were at one time a couple thousand theaters like this around the United States, and today there are probably a couple of dozen of them left.
It really just provided a whole catalyst for all of downtown to be restored.
In the real estate business, they say, put retail first and others will follow. But in fact, here, as in many other places, you put arts and entertainment first, and retail and residence and commercial followed.
Our office space is filled up, our storefronts have been opened up.
Without this theater, I don't think we would have seen such a growth of the film community and the artistic music community in a way.
It's a place where art, culture, and history all coincide in one place, and it just does not get better than that.
Unlike a lot of theaters, you don't see this on stage. You don't see this, but you feel, as you're waiting to go on, usually stage left, you feel the people who've been here before.
And when you come in and you sit down at a place in a place like this to take in a show, you're taking in all the shows and all the performances for the last 90 years.
You can't go in that and look at that beautiful facility without kind of feeling that you're now a part of the Austin culture and the Austin history.
Take one walk in here and, you'll be hooked.
The Paramount Theatre has become a symbol of what is possible when a treasure is neglected, and what is possible when that treasure is respected and revitalized. No film, theatrical, or musical experience is ever more fully appreciated or more memorable than when it is presented at the Paramount Theatre, a true Texas legend.